Welcome back to Reviews with Elaine, because I have opinions. And today's opinions will be about Star-Crossed by Elizabeth C. Bunce. And yes, I know I'm missing the dust jacket here. I ordered this book from Amazon. It came through Thrift Books, and it seems they think, like new, means no dust jacket. But I read this book for an utterly ridiculous reason, and I'm really glad I did. So someone on Threads that I'm friends with was bemoaning the fact that there's this trilogy that they absolutely love. They read the first two books like they were candy and was immediately looking for the third, only to find out the third never got published. Whether it be because the original books didn't sell as well or whatever reason, the third one just never came out. And my response to that was, oh, well, maybe you should just mention it more, like promote it more, and maybe if this book gets a sudden rebound in attention, the publisher or the author, whoever is the impediment, will actually go ahead and publish the third book. And I'm the kind of ridiculous person that doesn't really mind cliffhangers that much. Like, I prefer a book that ends with a feeling of like, and then they go off and do more adventures, than a book that ends with, and now the adventures are done. So, to me, an incomplete trilogy is not really that bad of a thing. So I was like, you know what, I'll go ahead and buy this book. It sounds interesting, I'll see if I like it, and who knows, maybe I can get another couple of them sold too. And yeah, this book happened to arrive right when I wanted the kind of book that it is, and it was perfect. So Star-Crossed is the story of a girl named Digger, though she goes by Celine throughout most of the book. She's a thief, and the book starts with a job going wrong. She and her partner slash lover, Tegan, are cornered by the Greenmen, who are this country's religious police. Sometime in the current king's reign, we're not sure exactly when, it seemed he outlawed all other religions, all other worship of all other gods, except for the one main goddess. And with that came the outlawing of magic and an inquisition, which horrifically murders anyone suspected of harboring heretical beliefs or abilities. Only Digger escaped this run-in with the Greenmen, and she knows that at least some of the Greenmen probably saw her and can offer a good enough description that she needs to get out of town. The only way she's going to survive is if she escapes. And luckily for her, she happens upon a boatload of teenagers who are noble people who seem to just be going off on an adventure. One of them is set to be married to a much older woman and has just found out, and they've just decided to go to his family estate, hang out, drink a little, and just, you know, let their cares disappear for a while. And they just basically invite Digger along, and she's fine with it, considering she needs to get out of town, and before long, this sweeps her up into a world that she's often danced around the edges of, but never been part of. The complex, plush, but still deeply dangerous world of the nobility. She is set up as one of the noble girl, a young woman named Mary's maid, and Digger feels strangely drawn to this young woman. She feels drawn to protect her and to care about her because she's just a really sweet girl. Digger will have to see if the liar god, Tiborin, will lead her astray or help her dance along the precipice of danger of the nobility of a country that may be about to head to war. Okay, so first of all, this is a court intrigue book, which if you've watched many of my videos, you know that I'm not fond of court intrigue books. You've probably heard me rail against them. And yeah, this is one of those books that every single character has at least a few secrets and are at least occasionally lying to each other, but I didn't mind it in this book. And what it is what I don't like about court intrigue books is that there's constant betrayal. There's this constant feeling that you can't really know what any character is really like. You don't know if they are good, if they are bad, if they are gray, what their true motivations are, whether they are lying about every single word that comes out of their mouths. And I don't really like that in a story. Partially just pure taste level. That's not what I'm looking for in a story. I like to know what the character's motivations are. But also, I do think part of the reason that I'm not really fond of this style of writing is it feels really unrealistic to me. Maybe it's just because I've never found myself in the halls of power. I've never been surrounded by the kind of people who could make one's life end or start afresh with one order or something like that. And yeah, I'm guessing that sort of situation would just set people up to be a little bit more calculating, a little bit more manipulative, a little bit more Weasley. But in my personal experience, most people are actually pretty straightforward in their motivations. And when people aren't, it tends to actually be noticeable. You can tell when your coworker is hoping you'll say something that they can report to the boss. You can tell when someone is hanging out with you just to find fodder to make fun of you later. You can tell when someone wishes you ill. Even if it is just the faintest hint that there's something off here, you generally can get the vibe that there is something off in that relationship. So a lot of these books where the characters really 100% believe that someone is their bestest friend ever, who would never harm them and just is devoted to helping them, and then that friend stabs them in the back, it just feels eye-rollingly unrealistic to me. And when it is realistic, when it is much more like, oh, there's something wrong with this relationship from the beginning, but just we're not sure what it is. Like, in my personal experience, when you are in a relationship with someone who is hiding their motivation, and I don't necessarily mean romantic relationship, this also works for friendships, coworker relationships, anything. You can feel there's something wrong there, though because of gaslighting, you often do blame it on yourself rather than them, but you know there's something wrong. And when books do portray this realistically, it just feels like I'm reading about an abusive relationship, which I don't really want to read about. But in this book, this one manages to drop us into a world where everyone is in constant danger of being turned over to the Inquisition. Every single person around the protagonist is keeping incredibly dangerous, life-altering secrets. And the main character basically ends up working as a spy, and I never felt any of the characters' actions came out of nowhere. Like, I understood everyone's motivations, and even when their actions were a twist, when it was a surprise what they were doing, it was foreshadowed and set up in such a way that when it happened, I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, that's logical. I'm surprised I didn't notice that was coming. There is one moment in the book when the protagonist feels she's been betrayed, and the very next chapter starts with her working through the other characters' motivations and deciding she hasn't really been betrayed. She just wasn't really paying that much attention to what was going on. She just didn't think something through. And this leads me to the other big thing about court intrigue books that I tend not to like. Court intrigue books tend to force the protagonist to think in those people are pawns, I can betray anyone because they are likely to be betraying me at any moment kind of mindset. And I don't want to spend over 300 pages with someone thinking like that the entire time. And Digger doesn't. She tries to. She's constantly being hamstrung by the fact that she likes these people. Like, she wants to distrust them. She wants to pay attention to who, like, she can turn in. But she keeps being like, no, I really like these people. They must all be innocent. It's fine. I'm just going to hide their secrets. And with really good reason. All these characters are immensely likable. So that every time she finds out something that could be damning, she's having to hide the information to protect them. And instead of the book being about, like, the characters constantly digging and trying to find more information, it almost becomes about her accidentally accumulating all these secrets and being like, oh god, I can't reveal any of them. And the bulk of the book just ends up being her trying to balance giving out just enough information to be able to hide the more important details. And it ends up being a book that the only person I'm mad at for keeping secrets is our lead. Like, I was annoyed at her sometimes, being like, if you just tell people, like, everything will work out. But I also understand that she's in deep enough water that she can't be sure if telling someone else something will damn them or help them. And overall, this was really well done. It managed to get in all that fun spying, all that fun thief work, all that fun, mystery without it feeling like everyone sucked. On that note, because of the nature of this book, there are some big secrets that are being held back from the reader for big emotional reveals later on. And most of them really do work. Most of them are set up, foreshadowed, implied, and revealed quickly enough that I was never annoyed as a reader. But there were a couple of things that left me just going, oh my god, tell me what the fuck is happening. I finished the book still not entirely sure what went wrong, with that job that Digger and Tegan were doing at the very beginning, like, the actual details have not been revealed at this point. I suspect they're going to be a big part of book 2, but I still don't know. And there's also the backstory of how she met Tegan. It comes out just way too late in the book, and it's like 100 pages in, and it just wasn't that big of a secret. Like, it didn't feel like something that we were building up to. It felt more like the author just didn't know how to work it into the story earlier, and it could have easily just been info dumped in the first couple of pages. It wouldn't have had the big emotional punch that it has, but Digger still could have had those big emotional moments at the moment they happen in the book and just be remembering things. But overall, there are a couple of reveals that are just so heavily foreshadowed that they felt a little bit less like a reveal and more like a clarification. But on the other side of that, there were a couple of reveals that made absolute perfect sense, but still completely surprised me. Overall, the way information is handled in this book is mostly really, really well done. There were just a couple of moments that I was a little bit like, okay, that one could have been revealed to us earlier on, and it wouldn't have been a detriment to the overall, like, emotional arc of the story. Just in general, I think secrets were handled really well in this book. I am a little bit less solid on the way class is handled in this book, because there's a lot about this that I loved. The fact that the noblewomen do work, and were expected to know how to cook and clean, and it wasn't just embroidery and dancing all the time. Like, there was actual labor happening. And I like the annoyance and the occasional feeling that Digger had that these people were from almost another world from her. Like, that level of class stuff really worked for me. But beyond that, the class issues just really aren't overly explored in this book. Beyond Fandra being a classist bitch, there is something about certain characters' ability to just sort of exude a commanding aura, which stinks a little bit of birthright to me, but could have been the author playing a little bit with, like, the assumptions that come from being raised in a position of power. But overall, it just felt like the book was trying to say something about class, and just wasn't really sure what it was saying about it, and just never really dug into it. So there's, like, these faint hints of, like, we're going to talk about class that just go nowhere. Also, this book handled age really well, but also really unusually. This is a YA book, and it does hit a lot of the common YA tropes. But what interests me here is the ways it bucks the common trends. Digger is 16, Mary, the girl who she works as maid for, is 14, or is turning 14, and Fandra, who is another noblewoman in Mary's retina, as it were, is like 18 or 19, I think, and they're all hanging out together. And, like, Digger acts older than she is, but that makes sense considering the upbringing she's had. Like, it makes sense for her to act a little bit more mature than she logically would be at this age. But the thing is, what really is interesting me here is that these people of wildly disparate ages are hanging out together and seem to be like a social group, and that is something that is historically accurate to, like, the way young noblewomen were just given, like, a collection of random other people around their age range within, like, a 5-year span to be their friends. And nowadays, I think you don't see that in a lot of books. Like, usually it does tend to just be like, we assume people who are a friend group are going to be within a year or two of each other. And the dynamics that change with these different ages, and the dynamics of, like, the less noble, the less powerful girls being the older ones versus the young one being the one who is politically powerful. And I just love, love, love the fact that Mary noticeably matures throughout the book. Like, Digger notices it, like, directly states it a couple times. But more than that, it's a change that we can see in her behavior. We see her growing up. And it's really well done. But also, there's some interesting stuff going on with the fact that in this world, girls are adults when they turn 14, but boys don't become adults until they're, like, 19, which is just a really interesting world-building thing to play with. And, this book basically ends up with all of our main young girls feeling very much their age and older than they were at the same time. And I feel like this really works for the kind of world this book is set in. I really love the fact that Digger, though she is really good at what she does, still shows the impulsive, emotional, like, overreacting of a teenager. And, like, Mary does find a lover, but it's treated very innocently. Like, it's not ever stated in the book, I don't think, if they even have kissed. Like, there is implications that they will probably marry in the end, but it's not even really clear that this is a romantic relationship and not just she cares about this random kid. Like, there's a possibility that Mary will be married off to an older man, but there's none of the hand-wringing that's usually associated with that in these kinds of books. She is surprisingly level-headed about it, and shows that even if this is something none of them really want, it's just a fact of life, and if she ends up with a guy who she likes at all, that's a plus. But I also think in general, relationships in this book were really interesting. It's subtly done, but it's very clear how much the marriages are business arrangements here. And it's like Mary's parents, for example. It's clear that they care about each other. They seem to enjoy each other's company. There is nothing that ever applies in this book that they love each other, that they are romantically attracted to each other, that they share a bed on a regular basis. None of that is really like focused on, and yet their arranged marriage seems to be a relatively happy one, and it's just so counter to the narrative we usually see in these kind of books. And I think it's a bit more realistic because objectively this is how marriage was treated throughout much of human history, at least in Western Europe. I will admit I don't know that much about much history elsewhere when it comes to marriage, but marriage has often been an arrangement, a business prospect, and if you ended up with someone that you don't hate, congrats, you did okay. And that's how it's treated in this book, and that's not treated as a horrible thing, it's just treated as a fact of life. There's also the fact that sex outside of marriage seems to be relatively normalized in this society. Like, there's an entire thing with women being encouraged to have bastards for the church to build a sort of holy army. But there's also a character who's a concubine, and she's treated really well by the narrative, in my opinion. She is humanized, she is shown as doing what she has to survive, but also having agency, having power, having her own strength. I also really love the way Digger's possible love interests are treated here. So, like, there is no official love interest here except for Tegan, who does not actually physically appear in the book. He's referenced a lot, he never shows up on page. And when she's pretending to be the lady's maid, there is a man who seems interested in marrying her off to one of his sons, and she's not horrified by this. She knows it won't work, but the implications here are that she knows it won't work because she's not who she's pretending to be. And it's not like she's horrified by the notion of being married off to a strange man. She's just sort of like, okay, that's fine. But, like, she is capable of just casually chatting with guys and it not being weird. And there are a couple of noblemen that she runs across that she seems to have real chemistry with, that I suspect that, yes, they might be love interest in later books, but it goes nowhere in this book. And it's not the kind of goes nowhere as in, like, it feels like something was set up that, like, just fell apart. No, it's the sort of thing that, like, if I did not read a lot of YA fantasy and therefore did not know that, oh, look, this character has noticed that guy is attractive and is chatting with him for more than 2 pages, love interest! I would never have thought them to be love interests. Like, it makes just as much sense for her to be friends with these men as it is for her to, like, have a romantic tryst with them later on in the series. And I love that because it feels like if we are leading towards a romantic relationship, there's a lot more establishment here. Like, I understand them being together. She has witty banter with a couple of these guys. She definitely seems to get along with them, and they seem to get along with her. And there's none of the, like, oh, I just notice his eyes and fall into them. No, it's like, seems to be an emotional connection with these people that, like I said, could be just friendship, or it could eventually develop into romance. And either way, I feel like I'll be equally happy on this one. Overall, I just really like the way that is handled in this book. I also like the world building here. We are in a very traditional pseudo-medieval, pseudo-European kind of world, but I like where the author is going with the religion and the religious wars. I like the fact that there doesn't seem to be as much wealth inequality as we just sort of imagine. Like, it is more balanced in that, yeah, the noble people are expected to work, are expected to be able to clean up after themselves and cook and clean and stuff. And at least from my understanding of medieval Europe, that actually is pretty accurate. Noble women did not usually just sit on cushions all day long. They actually did shit. And I really like the fact that the magic is introduced but hasn't been largely explored yet. We get enough of it that we feel like we know vaguely how it works. I'm not hungry for more explanation here, but it's also not focusing intensely on that. And overall, just the world building, like, there's nothing that throws me out of the world here. It all works. And yeah, it's all very classic, like, fantasy kind of world building, but it doesn't need to be anything greater than that because that's not the focus of what the book is doing. On the note of what the book is doing, for a while I was afraid that I was going to need to talk about the logic of some of the characters' choices in this review, and specifically, why the hell these noble teenagers pick up Digger in the first place bothered me so much for, I'd say, a good 100 pages of the book. For about 50 pages, it just feels random as hell. Like, there's no explanation whatsoever. They just did it for funsies. And eventually we get a little bit of explanation and it makes no damn sense. And then we get a little bit more of an explanation and it starts to vaguely make sense. And it feels like for a while it felt like the reason the teenagers picked up Digger was just because the narrative needed her to be there, and so the book was just like, it's fine, ignore it, it's fine, they just did it. It's fine, we don't need reasons. But then we start to get the impression that there is a deeper reason here, and it just hasn't been explained. Then we get a reveal of a reason, but it feels like an incomplete reveal. Like, I still feel like we're missing a big chunk of information here, and I think I know what the bit of information is, but of course I'm not going to mention it because that would be major spoilers. And also, I'm not sure, this is just a theory, but if my theory is right, it all makes sense and it works really well and is setting up what is probably going to be a bigger plot thread later on in the series. And it all ends up working out in a really fun way. So in the end, there were a couple of other things like that, things where I was questioning the logic of characters' decisions, but the book quickly, like, reveals a little bit here and there and a little bit of information here and there that ends up making their decisions make more sense. And it's just, we didn't know why they were doing it at that moment. Except for maybe the ending. So a buttload of shit happens really quickly in the end of this book, and I'm not going to tell you what any of it is because of course that would be major spoilers and would ruin the entire damn book. But basically it's one of those climaxes where things just start snowballing and it leads to a running conclusion where every choice leads to more running and more action and more fighting and more decisions, which leads to more running and more actions and more threatening. And there's just a couple of big decisions that I don't buy why they were made. Why the adults bow out, why the Inquisitor demands instead of just takes, and why a character runs and then returns. Like, none of these decisions feel really organic to me, and it felt like they had to happen just to make the series of events make sense. And while there's a lot of conflict in the ending, none of it really feels hard enough in a way. Like, none of it feels like there was any threat of it not working out. And, like, it all ended up just being okay. And, like, I'm guessing what happened here just because I myself have written a conclusion like this that did not quite work. So I think I know what happened, and I think what it is the author probably had the idea of a couple of the scenes from the conclusion in her mind from the very beginning, and as she was writing the books, things suddenly changed. Motivation suddenly changed. Character suddenly changed. Like, somebody got shifted around. And when she went to write the climax, the scenes didn't quite fit together anymore. So she was sort of like piecing them together and like turning the puzzle pieces that way and this way to see if she could get them to click together. And in the end, it sort of doesn't click together entirely. Like, it felt like there needed to be some threatening, a fight in the snow, and a heroic rescue, but how those pieces fit together just jangled against each other incorrectly. And, like, don't get me wrong, this is still a very enjoyable ending. The author made sure that all the characters had important roles to play. Like, they all had their moment. Everyone ended up with agency and choices. Everyone got the ending that felt right for them. But how they got there felt just a little bit like someone throwing events at a dartboard to see what hit. And it was one of those endings that, as I was reading it, I did not see anything wrong. It was great. It was wonderful. It was a bit hard to follow at bits, but mostly it was great. And then it was only when I was sitting down to write the review that I was like, that ending had flaws. Now, don't get me wrong, this far from spoiled the book. Like, I still very much enjoyed this book. The next one is already in my shopping cart on Amazon, but I just find myself wanting to make suggestions about how to clean up this ending. But overall, I found this book really enjoyable. Like, I liked it. I understand why the random person on Threads is still hoping for the third in the trilogy. I can really imagine, especially considering, yeah, I already got vibes that the second one's gonna end on a cliffhanger. This is a book that, like, yeah, you can read as a standalone. It's fine. It's fine. There's a lot of stuff that's going to be resolved later on, but it feels like a complete book. I'm guessing the second one's not going to feel that way. But the characters are fun, they're likable, they're believable, they have a real humanity to them, which I love, and they are interesting. I really love the relationships and how they develop throughout the story. I love the world that is being set up here, and I love the natural way the protagonist sort of just accidentally slips from just trying to survive into being a hero simply by trying to be an okay person. Like, that, like, snowballing really works for me. I think this is a great start for a really good series, and I'm really interested in book 2. And I'm still interested in book 2, even knowing that book 3 does not yet exist. So overall, yeah, this is a good book. Check out Star-Crossed by Elizabeth C. Bunce.